"This isn't your home anymore, Mom." Daniel said it standing in the doorway of the kitchen I'd cooked in for 11 years, wearing the sweater I'd knitted him 2 Christmases ago, while behind him his wife, Whitney, folded her arms and looked at the floor like she already knew what was coming. The oven timer was still counting down on the ham. 94 minutes left. I remember that number because I stared at it instead of at my son's face, because I couldn't quite believe the sentence that had just come out of his mouth. "Daniel," I said, "it's Christmas Eve." "I know what day it is." His voice cracked a little, but his eyes didn't. "Whitney and I talked about it. We think it's time you found your own place." My own place. As if I hadn't lived on Wexford Lane in Dayton, Ohio for 11 years. As if my name hadn't been on the deed to this house until 14 months ago, when Daniel sat across from me at this same kitchen table and told me signing it over to him would make things simpler after his father died. I want to tell you what happened next. What I found 3 days later in a drawer I hadn't opened since my husband's funeral, and what it meant for every single person standing in that kitchen. But I need you to understand how we got here first, because trust me, nobody in this story is who they seem to be on Christmas Eve. If you've ever sat in a room you used to call your own and felt like a guest, I think you'll want to hear the rest of this. I'll be back with more of it in a moment, and if you want to stick around for these kinds of stories, the ones that don't wrap up as neatly as you'd hope, at least not right away, I'd love the company. Stay with me. What happened after Daniel said those words changed how I understood my whole family. My name is Diane Marsh. I'm 61 years old, and until that December I'd spent my entire adult life in Dayton, Ohio, the last 11 years in a modest 3-bedroom colonial on Wexford Lane that my husband Robert and I bought in 2013, back when Daniel was still in college and our daughter Casey was finishing high school. Robert died in October of 2023. Pancreatic cancer. Diagnosed in March, gone 7 months later. He was 59. We'd been married 34 years, and I won't pretend the year after he died was anything other than a fog. I moved through it doing the things a person does: funeral, paperwork, thank you cards for casseroles I barely remembered eating. Daniel was the one who showed up. He drove down from Columbus every weekend that winter, sat with me at the kitchen table, helped me sort through Robert's files. His wife Whitney came sometimes too, quieter, more reserved, but attentive in her own way. She'd bring their son Mason, 6 years old then, and he'd sit on my lap while I cried, which somehow helped more than anything an adult said to me. It was Daniel who first mentioned the deed. Robert and I owned the house outright, no mortgage, paid off in 2019 after Robert's early retirement package came through. "Estate stuff gets messy, Mom," Daniel told me one night in January 2024. "If something happened to you, Casey and I would be fighting probate courts for months. If you just transfer it to me now, I'll make sure everything's protected. You'll still live here, obviously. Nothing changes." I trusted him. He was my son. I signed the papers at a lawyer's office in Kettering on a gray Tuesday in February, and for a while, nothing did change. I still made his coffee the way he liked it, still had my garden, still slept in the room Robert and I had shared. It was small things at first, things I told myself were nothing. Whitney rearranging my kitchen cabinets, without asking. By that spring, the shift had a shape to it, even if I still didn't want to name it. Whitney started calling the house our house in conversations with her sister on the phone, conversations I wasn't meant to overhear but did, standing in the hallway with a laundry basket in my arms. "Once we get Diane's room converted, we'll finally have space for Mason's stuff," she said in April, and I remember standing very still, listening to my own name used like I was a tenant they were managing. I brought it up with Daniel once, gently, in May. "Am I in the way here?" I asked him over dinner, trying to make it sound like a joke. "Don't be dramatic, Mom," he said, not looking up from his phone. Nobody said that. Nobody had to say it. By August, my sewing machine had been moved to the garage. By October, Whitney had started leaving real estate listings for affordable senior living communities on the kitchen counter, always angled just so, like she wanted me to notice, without her having to say a word. Then came December and the ham and 94 minutes on the oven timer. "We think it's time you found your own place," Daniel had said, and when I asked him why now, why tonight of all nights, Whitney finally spoke. "Diane, we love you, But this house needs to work for our family. Mason needs a yard he doesn't have to share. We need an office. We need this to actually be ours. It is yours, I said quietly. I signed it over to you. Exactly, Whitney said, and there was something in the way she said it, flat, final, that told me this conversation had been planned for weeks, maybe longer, and I was the last person in the house to find out about it. If you've ever realized a decision about your own life had already been made without you in the room, you know exactly what that felt like. I stood in my own kitchen holding a pair of oven mitts, and I understood, for the first time, that I no longer had a say in where I would spend the rest of my life. Where exactly do you expect me to go, Daniel? It's December 24th. We're not kicking you out tonight, he said, and I remember thinking that was supposed to be comforting. We just think, after the holidays, maybe by February you'd look at some places. Whitney found a really nice one in Beaver Creek. It has a garden. You like gardens. I looked at my son, 34 years old, standing in a house I'd raised him in, telling me about a garden in a facility 40 minutes away, as though he were doing me a kindness. Your father built the deck outside that window, I said. I planted the rose bushes the year you graduated high school. I don't want a garden in Beaver Creek, Daniel. I want this one. It's not about the roses, Mom. Whitney's voice had an edge now. It's about boundaries. This has to be our home, not a home we're sharing with your grief. That word, grief, landed like a slap. As though missing my husband in the house we built our life in was an inconvenience I was inflicting on them. Mason wandered into the kitchen just then, 7 years old now, still in his reindeer pajamas, holding the ornament we always let him place on the tree, a little wooden rocking horse that had been Robert's as a child. Grandma, can we do the ornament now? He asked, oblivious to everything. Nobody answered him for a moment. Daniel looked at the floor. Whitney looked at her phone. I knelt down, took the ornament from his small hands, and said, Of course we can, baby. Because whatever was happening between the adults in that room, it wasn't his to carry. But as I hung that little rocking horse on the tree, my hands were shaking, and not from the cold. I was thinking about the drawer in my old bedroom closet, Robert's drawer, the one I still hadn't opened, the one I'd been avoiding for 14 months, because I wasn't ready. Something told me it was time. I didn't sleep that night. Christmas morning came and went with a strange, brittle politeness. Gifts exchanged, coffee poured. Everyone performing normalcy for Mason's sake. Casey, my daughter, called from Charlotte to wish us Merry Christmas, and I almost told her everything right there on the phone, but something stopped me. I wanted to understand it myself first. 3 days later, on December 27th, I finally opened Robert's old drawer, the walnut dresser in what used to be our bedroom, now Whitney's reading nook. Buried under folded sweaters I'd never had the heart to donate, I found a manila envelope with my name on it in Robert's handwriting. Inside was a letter, dated August 2023, 2 months before he died. And a second document, a trust, drawn up quietly through his own lawyer in Beaver Creek, one I'd never seen before. The letter said he'd started to worry about Daniel's spending after Whitney's business, a boutique fitness studio she'd opened in 2021, began hemorrhaging money. Robert had quietly paid off 2 of their credit lines that year without telling me, and he'd grown afraid that if anything happened to him, Daniel and Whitney would eventually look to our house as a financial cushion. So he'd set up a trust that would let me live in the Wexford Lane house for the rest of my life, regardless of who held the deed. A life estate, his lawyer later explained to me, filed and legally binding, completely separate from the informal transfer Daniel had talked me into a few months after Robert's death. Robert had known. He'd protected me before he even understood exactly how it would happen. My hands shook reading his familiar handwriting. Diane, if you're reading this, don't let them make you feel like a guest in your own life. This house is yours until you choose otherwise. I love you, Rob. If you've ever found out someone loved you more carefully than you realized, in ways they never said out loud, you know the kind of grief. I called the lawyer's office in Beaver Creek the next morning. The paralegal confirmed everything. Robert had recorded the life estate with the county in September 2023, a month before he died, and it was fully enforceable regardless of the deed transfer I'd signed in February. Legally, Daniel owned the house. But legally, I could not be removed from it. Not by him, not by Whitney, not by anyone for as long as I lived, unless I chose to leave. I sat with that information for 2 full days before I said anything. Part of me wanted to march into their bedroom and read the letter aloud. Part of me, the bigger part, just felt tired. Tired of being managed. Tired of watching my son avoid my eyes at his own dinner table. On December 30th, I asked Daniel to sit down with me alone, without Whitney, in the living room where Robert's recliner still sat by the window. I found something of your father's, I told him, and I handed him the letter first, not the legal document. I wanted him to read his father's words before he heard mine. I watched my son's face change as he read it. He got to the line about Whitney's business debts and went very still. He paid off 2 of our credit lines? Daniel asked quietly. I didn't know that. He didn't want you to. He didn't want you to feel ashamed. He just wanted to make sure I'd be okay. I paused. Daniel, I'm not leaving this house. Not in February, not ever, unless it's my own choice. Your father made sure of that before he died. Daniel didn't argue. He sat holding that letter for a long time, and when he finally looked up, his eyes were full in a way I hadn't seen since the funeral. Mom, he said, I need to tell you something about Whitney's studio. It's worse than you think. That's part of why we wanted the house valued. We were going to refinance against it. That confession took almost an hour to fully come out. Whitney's fitness studio, which had looked so promising when it opened, had been losing money since 2022. They'd taken a second loan against their own condo in Columbus to keep it afloat, and by that Christmas they were nearly $80,000 in debt, with the studio's lease renewal due in March. Whitney hadn't wanted anyone to know. Not me, not even Casey. Daniel had gone along with pushing me out partly out of loyalty to his wife, and partly, he admitted, out of shame that he hadn't stopped it sooner. I let her talk about that Beaver Creek place because I didn't know how else to fix this, he said. I thought if we had the house free and clear, no complications, no shared ownership, we could refinance it and clear the debt before it got worse. I told myself it was about space for Mason. It wasn't, not really. I want to be clear about something. None of that excused how it felt to be told, on Christmas Eve, that I no longer belonged in my own home. But hearing it, I understood Daniel differently. Not as someone who'd stopped loving me, but as a 34-year-old man in over his head, terrified of his marriage falling apart, who'd let that fear turn into something cruel without fully realizing it. I asked him one question. Does Whitney know you're telling me this? No, he said. But she needs to hear it from me before this goes any further. That night, for the first time in over a year, my son hugged me the way he used to when he was young enough to still need me more than he needed to prove himself to anyone else. I'm sorry, Mom, he said into my shoulder. I let this house become about money instead of about you. If you've ever watched someone you love make a bad choice out of fear instead of malice, you know how complicated forgiveness can feel, necessary and hard-earned at the same time. I'll tell you what came next. Daniel told Whitney everything 2 nights later, with me in the next room. I heard raised voices, then quiet ones, then eventually the 3 of us sat at the kitchen table together, the same table where he told me I needed to find my own place 2 weeks earlier. Whitney didn't apologize easily. She's not built that way. But she did say something that stayed with me. I was so scared of losing everything we built that I stopped seeing you as anything except an obstacle. That wasn't fair to you. It wasn't a warm apology, but it was an honest one, and coming from her, I understood that honesty was its own kind of effort. We didn't fix the finances that week, or even that month. But we made a plan. Daniel and Whitney sold their Columbus condo in March, took a modest loss, but cleared most of the debt. Whitney restructured the studio with a business consultant Casey connected her with. My daughter, it turned out, had a friend from her MBA program who specialized in exactly this kind of turnaround. By June, the studio was breaking even for the first time in 2 years. I stayed in the house on Wexford Lane. Daniel offered, quietly and without prompting, to transfer the deed back to my name entirely once their finances stabilized. Not because he had to, but because, he said, it should have always been in the will the way Dad wanted it, not the way I panicked into it. We planted new rose bushes together that spring, Daniel and Mason and I, right where Robert's originals had died off 2 winters before. Mason asked if we could name one after his grandfather. We named 3. Small gestures, but they meant something. Sunday dinners came back. Whitney started asking my opinion on the garden instead of leaving listings on the counter. It wasn't instant, and it wasn't perfect. But it was real, and it was ours again. All of us, together, in the house Robert had made sure I'd never have to leave. Looking back now, almost 18 months later, I think about that Christmas Eve differently than I did in the moment. At the time, it felt like the end of something, the end of being wanted, the end of belonging anywhere. What I understand now is that it was actually the moment everything hidden finally had to come into the light. Robert's quiet protection of me, Daniel's fear, Whitney's shame, all of it surfacing at once because nobody could pretend anymore. I think about Robert's letter often. Don't let them make you feel like a guest in your own life. He wrote that not knowing exactly how it would happen, just knowing his family well enough to guess that it might. There's a particular kind of love in that, the kind that plans quietly for a future you're not there to see, just in case the people you love need protecting from themselves. I don't think Daniel is a bad son. I think he was a frightened one, and fear makes people do things love wouldn't otherwise allow. I've had to hold both of those truths at once, that he hurt me, and that he's still my son, still capable of becoming someone better than the man who stood in that kitchen doorway in December. Growth doesn't erase what happened. It just gives it somewhere to go. If you've ever had to forgive someone before they'd even fully earned it, because the alternative was losing them completely, I think you understand the particular weight of that choice. It's not weakness. It's a decision to believe someone can still become who you hoped they'd be. We had Christmas again last year, in that same kitchen, ham in the same oven. Mason placed the rocking horse ornament on the tree without anyone reminding him to save it for last. Nobody said anything about houses, or deeds, or moving out. We just ate dinner together the way we used to, the way Robert would have wanted. If there's one thing I'd want you to take from this, it's that the people who love us can still get it wrong, badly wrong, sometimes, without meaning to stop loving us at all. My son said words to me on Christmas Eve that I don't think I'll ever fully forget. But I also watched him spend the following year proving, in small and imperfect ways, that he meant something different than what those words first suggested. I still live on Wexford Lane. The deed is back in my name now, filed quietly in March by a lawyer in Kettering. No ceremony, no announcement. Just Daniel handing me an envelope after Sunday dinner and saying, "This should have never left you, Mom." I keep Robert's letter in the drawer where I found it, and every so often, usually around the holidays, I take it out and read it again. I'm telling you this story because I know I'm not the only one who's ever felt like a guest in a life they built with their own hands. If that's ever happened to you, if you've ever had to fight quietly for a place that should never have been in question, I hope you know it's worth fighting for, and I hope you had someone or something looking out for you the way Robert looked out for me. If this story meant something to you, I'd love it if you stuck around for the next one. Not because I need the numbers, but because it genuinely helps to tell these stories to people who understand them the way you do. And if you've got a moment, I'd really love to hear in the comments, would you have forgiven Daniel as quickly as I did, or would you have needed more time? I think about that question a lot, and I'd like to know how you'd have handled it. Thank you for staying with me through this one. I'll see you in the next story.